Hello, everyone. So in this video, we'll talk about installment loans, and we'll discuss sort of how they're structured and what you can expect, what factors really influence how much you pay, and so on and so forth. Okay, so well, what is an installment loan, first of all? So this is the most typical type of loan that you will get that is not sort of like a loan through like a credit card or maybe you know, a loan from a friend or something. So the most typical loan is an installment loan, and the usual case is that you will make payments every month. So installment uh, loan um, with monthly installments. And another way we can say that is monthly payments. And you will have an APR, a rate that you're charged, and an APR, which we'll write as R, for a period of, say, Y years. Okay. And so to what you want to compute, I mean, the first thing you'll want to compute before you take out any kind of loan like this, and loans like this um, are typical for car loans, are typical for personal loans, are typical for mortgage, home loans. So, uh, so you want to know, you want to compute uh, monthly payments. How much are you going to owe per month? Now, um, so this period of Y years, this is called your term. But yeah, the term will affect it, the rate will affect it, and of course the initial amount or the principal will affect it. So I didn't write that down, but let me also write down uh, that there's another variable here, of course, P, uh, which is the principal. Principal P. Okay, so the important numbers you're going to want are these, and we're going to recast some of them in terms of that make a formula for this computable uh, for practical examples. Okay, um, so let's see. So what are those computable numbers that we need to calculate? Well, the computable numbers are the numbers that we saw when we had to go from a simple interest rate scenario or even an annual interest rate scenario to multiple compounding. And the point is that your installment loan will compound typically monthly if you're doing a monthly installment loan. So what you want to do then is you want to calculate your periodic rates um, to apply this formula that we're going to write down. Your periodic rate, which is our lowercase p, and that's going to be your APR. Oh, I'm sorry, I should write APR as lowercase r. Sorry. It's going to be your APR divided by 12. So this is your periodic rate. And then you're going to replace the year with the number of payments that you plan to make. So also you want to calculate number of payments. And if you're doing it once a month for Y years, you'll get that you're going to have 12 times Y. So these two numbers are the ones that you're going to really use, but they're not the headline numbers that you're given, right? So when you go to a bank and you say, I want a personal loan, they're not going to say, how many payments do you want to make? Or what's your periodic rate? They're going to say, well, we have a loan offered for APR of 5%, which would be great, or 20%, which would not be good. And that the term is going to be 5 years or 20 years, and they'll give you that. But these are the numbers that you will then use to compute your payments and to compute a schedule, as we'll see in a minute. So how do you do this? Well, I'm going to give you the formula. The book provides a formula. There's a way you can derive this formula, but I think it's a little bit too much, maybe. But it's basically the same kinds of ideas that we looked at when we were dealing with retirement. It's manipulating these geometric series and solving some equations involving them. So let's get the monthly payment for this, say monthly payment formula, and this is going to be M. It's going to be P. That's your principal, how much you're taking out in your loan, your initial amount. And then you'll have your periodic rate times 1 plus your periodic rate. Remember, these are decimal forms, so you take your APR, convert it to a decimal form, take the power t, then divide this whole thing by, here, let me make a slightly larger fraction here, divided by 1 plus your periodic rate to the t minus 1. And if you don't like this formula, I don't blame you. It's a little bit, there's a lot of variables and they're everywhere, and okay, it may make your head spin. But what we'll look at in a minute is that a lot of these formulas are available and maybe hidden in some of the online calculators that you may use to find these monthly payment amounts. The important thing is that you know what factors are going in and then how they affect your payments, how much you're paying, and how long you have to pay. But let's go ahead and use this formula in a simple example. So last time, we talked about credit card debt, and we saw that well, we went through some example where you had a finance charge because you left a balance, and then your balance after the end of the month of January was around $2,700. Okay. So let's say you're like, well, I don't want to pay that right now because I'm tight for cash. And so what I want to do is I want to take out a personal loan. It's not a big one. 2,700 is something that may be not a big deal, but you go to a local bank and you find a really great bank, local credit union or something that charges, say, 6% for a 2-year loan on $2,700. So the bank charges 6% on a 2-year loan, 6% APR. 2-year loan. So these numbers then are going to give you your Y and your R. So R is going to be 0.06 and Y is 2. Now, you're very happy about this. I mean, I would think, because if you're thinking, well, I'm going to take 2 years to pay off my credit card just by paying my credit card. Well, the credit card interest rate our APR was 18%, I think, in our example. So much higher than 6%. And you'll get a better deal here by refinancing this loan through the bank. So you decide to go with this, and you need to apply this formula. So in order to apply the formula, we have to adjust our rates R and our time 2 years to get P, our periodic rate, which is R over 12, and that is going to be 0.005. So let me move this up here. Okay. And then we need to get the number of payments, which is exactly 2 times 12, or 12 times 2, which is 24. And now I have and of course I didn't say, but the principal is the amount that I'm going to take out is my loan of 2,700. So now I need to calculate, and I'll just write down the numbers in the equation. So my principal is 2,600. My P is 0.005. My 1 plus P is 1.005. And I'm going to take that to the T, which is 24. Great. And of course, I'll divide this whole amount by 1.005, the 24 minus 1. I'm just putting parentheses there just to make sure that we see that there's an exponent. Again, that's one of those ones where I'm going to struggle to calculate that by hand, so I will go ahead and use my calculator here. Let me bring it up. And for these kinds of formulas, I do like to use the parentheses in the calculator, just to make sure that I'm not, I don't know, um, making some problems. So first I'll calculate this number here, this factor. So let's do that. So it's 0.005 times 1.005, all to the 24th power, that 1.005. And then I need to divide by the amount 1.005 to the 24th power minus 1. And that gives me in total 0.04432. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm going to multiply that times I don't know why. I'm sure many of you caught this, but I don't know why I changed the amount. $2,700. That's how much my principal was. I'm sorry, I wrote down 2,600. So I'll multiply this whole thing by $2,700. And I get that this equals almost $120. So this is going to give me $119.67, basically. And this is the monthly amount that I'll have to pay in order to get this loan. So this is a very practical kind of lesson, I want to say, in that, okay, the math looks a little complicated as far as the arithmetic goes. You can do it with a calculator, though. And as long as you know these sort of inputs, there's 3 inputs here: your principal, your APR, and your term, how long you're going to do it. Once you have those 3 inputs, you can make a computation to say, this is how much I'll owe per month, and give you an idea. Now, of course, there are a lot of good apps out there that will allow you to do this without having to struggle with the formulas, right? So let's go ahead and take a look. So I did a search of a few apps, but they're all sort of similar. Okay, so here's one. You just go online and you you can put in, and will ask you essentially exactly these three variables. So this loan amount is our principal. This is P. We write in 2,700. The loan term is 2 years, and the interest rate is 6%. So again, this is your APR. And when you make this calculation, yeah, so it produces the monthly amount, which is 119 and 67 cents. So this formula is the one that they use in these apps. And you go ahead and you can use it yourself if you memorize it, or you can use these apps and they'll produce these numbers for you. Another useful piece of information that they might provide is they'll multiply this number by 24. So if you take your monthly payments, you're making 24 payments at this amount, multiply it by 24, you get this amount. And that tells you essentially how much more you're paying. You know, it will say, okay, well, you're not just paying the 2,700 back to the bank, you're paying the 2,700 back to the bank plus all this accumulated interest. And how much is that? That's $171.98. If on the other hand, you were thinking, well, I don't want to go to the bank. That banker's really annoying. He starts giving me formulas. I just will keep the balance on my card. Well, the balance on the card was the same. The amount is about the same, and you can calculate. You might get a slightly different number because the finance charges are a bit different than your personal loan, and in fact, the actual amount will be a lot more because they'll add in whatever you're using the card for if you use the card to the finance charge. So, but forgetting about that, and you just think of it as, let's say you throw the card in the garbage and you just say, I'm going to pay the credit card. Well, that's going to be at an 18%. And rather than paying $119, you're going to pay $134. So it's about $15 more a month, but that adds up over those 2 years to be almost $400 or so, maybe a little less, that you have to pay more by just not going to the bank and taking out that loan. All right, so that's a kind of a useful thing to keep in mind when you're doing these kinds of financial loans. Let's do one more example by hand, and then I'll share another computation to be aware of. So let's see here, one moment. Go back to sharing the pad. All right, so another thing that you may want to compute would be, say, mortgage. So mortgages, again, they are sort of done in the same manner. And I'll take this monthly payment formula and bring it over here. Oops. Okay, so let's keep this formula in front of us. And let's see here. So here's another problem. All right, so let's say you want to buy a house. So a house costs let's say $350,000. It's a decent house. And the rates that you're going to be charged by the bank for a mortgage is 6. Now, I should say that maybe the house doesn't cost that amount, but maybe the house costs a bit more, but you need to borrow that amount. So let me amend this problem slightly. You need to borrow. You borrow $350,000 at 6.11%, say, for a house. And what that, I mean, you'll all, if you haven't, you're a bit more advanced, or maybe you've lived a bit more. you may have gone through or will go through a housing purchase. And typically, you'll need to also provide a down payment. Um, and so the amount you get on the mortgage is not the full amount of the house typically. So you have to put a certain amount down in order to get a loan. But a 6.11 is an interest rate that is pretty common around this particular time. So we'll look at this example. And you want to calculate how much you'll owe. Now, the most conventional thing to do is to just do a fixed rate mortgage at this amount or at a fixed interest rate, and to have it as a 30-year term for a house with a 30-year term. And if you're interested in kind of how much you pay for rent every month, you will want to calculate how much will you owe the bank every month to pay this mortgage. Now, that calculation, be aware as you're going into home ownership, that calculation is just how much you will owe the bank for the loan. There are, of course, other costs to owning a house, including taxes and insurance, and those costs can be significant. So there's what we're going to calculate is just how much you will owe for the price of the home, for the mortgage of the home. Um, all right, so how do we calculate this? Well, we just use this formula that's sitting in front of us, and we'll say, okay, the monthly payments. Well, before I use this formula, I need to go ahead and calculate my P and my T. So what is my P? My lowercase p is going to be 6.11, but I'm going to divide it by 12. And I don't know what that is, so I'll have to go ahead and compute that. I mean, it's close to half, but a little bit over half. It's almost 0.51, but or 0.501. Sorry, 5.01. And I also made a mistake here. I apologize. I want to use the decimal form of my APR, not the full form. Okay, oops. So let's go ahead and calculate this. Grab my calculator out. So this is 0.0611 divided by 12 is 0.00509166. Dot, dot, dot. Now, when you're dealing with mortgages, 30-year mortgages, it's a good idea to almost leave this lowercase, this periodic rate in this form 0.0611 divided by 12. Because over the longer term, these kind of rounding errors can really kind of creep in. So our y is going to be, well, sorry, not our y, our t is going to be the number of payments that we make. We're going over 30 years at a monthly payment. So that's going to be 12 times 30, which is 360. All right. So now we can go ahead and calculate our monthly payment. So we're going to have $350,000. And now we have this big computation in front of us. So it's going to be 0.0611 divided by 12. I'm going to go ahead and keep this fraction here times 1 plus 0.0611 divided by 12 to the 360. And then we will divide the whole thing by 1 plus 0.0611 divided by 12 to the 360. Minus 1. So it's a fairly ugly looking thing. Let's go ahead and compute it. So we'll get 350,000. Oops. Let me calculate this number inside of the parentheses first, this factor, as I did before. So if I calculate that factor, I'm going to use a lot of parentheses here. 0.0611 divided by 12, that's 1, times 1 plus 0.0611 divided by 12 to the move this over a little bit. All to the, so I need to round this. To the 360th power. Okay. And then I'm going to divide this by, I'm going to just put a 1 plus 0.0611 divided by 12. All of that to the 360 power. Minus, and this is equaling 0.006, 0.06, blah, blah, blah. And I need to multiply that by my principal of $350,000. And I get 21, 23, and 24 cents. So my solution here is going to be, or my monthly payment, sorry, it's going to be $2,123.24. So if you're wondering how much you would pay in a mortgage, if you took out that amount, that's how much you would pay in a mortgage if you took that amount. Now, again, I really want to emphasize, because people go into home ownership not knowing necessarily, that is just the amount you pay for your mortgage to pay back the mortgage, not to, and it's not how much you will be paying the bank. Banks generally build what's called an escrow, and that escrow takes this amount and adds an insurance policy amount for the home insurance and taxes. They set aside taxes for property, and they add all of that up, and that can be anywhere from a few $100s to over $1,000 more, depending on where you live. So this is how you calculate that. And now again, you might be like, well, Dr. Kerr, that's all well and good, but I'm not going to remember this formula after I leave this video or this class. And I will say that's okay. As I said, there are these apps online that you can consult. But moreover, you can, if you want to play around a little bit and look at a YouTube video, you can also build your own schedules. So there's something called an amortization schedule as well, and that has a little more nuanced information, and I just want to share that with you. We're not going to do too much of this in this class. However, in your life, you most likely will see something like this, and so it's worth looking at this point. All right, so let me share screen here on this one. So this is an example of a sort of self-made amortization schedule that does the example that I just computed. You'll see that the payment amount is exactly the same each month, and it's what we just computed. And however, I didn't use the formula that I used. Instead, I used an Excel program that actually computes that number for you. So it's essentially that's what this formula does with Excel. And again, watch a YouTube video. You'll learn how to actually create one of these tables yourself on Excel. But it takes the relevant input of the rate, the APR, the principal, and sort of the number of payments in it, and it produces that answer. Oops. Somehow yeah. Okay. So, but the amortization schedule does a bit more than just produce the payments. It also will give you how much you're paying in principal and how much you're paying in interest. Now, what does that mean? That means that of this payment that's listed here, of the $2,123, how much of that payment for that particular period is going towards reducing the amount that you owe, and how much is going to paying interest to the bank for loaning you the money. And that those numbers change over time. So initially, you can see in this very large loan of $350,000, very little of the money that you're paying goes to the principal. And why does that matter? Well, it matters because you may not want to live there 30 years. So maybe you're living there, 10 years or 5 years, and you want to kind of say, okay, well, after 5 years, how much do I owe on that loan? How much money do I have in that house versus how much money do I owe on the loan? And this is sort of like how much people say this is the equity you have in your house. Um, how much is the loan, the balance of the loan versus the worth of the house. So how much you're paying in principal really matters as to how much sort of equity you have, how much value, monetary value you have. All right, in your home, of course, in your investment. So what you can see with this loan is that you're paying very little to principal at first and a lot to interest. And this is typical for large loans like a mortgage, is that at first you pay very, very little in principal and very much interest. And in fact, if you look at this first column, this is sort of the year that you're in. If you go down to flashing, I think it's 19 years in the future, you've been paying this amount every year for 19 years, and you get to sort of this stage, sort of the end of the 19 years, and you'll see that right here, the amount of interest you're paying is over in this column, in the E column. Amount of principal you're paying is over in the D column. All of a sudden, you're paying more in your mortgage monthly payment in principal than you're paying in interest. But it takes you 19 years to get to that point where you're actually your mortgage payment is actually going more to yourself, in other words, to paying down your debt, than it's going to just giving money to the bank in interest, in a form of interest. So that's how long it takes with a rate of 6.11. And that's a very typical rate. And in fact, historically, that might even be a pretty reasonable rate, 6.11. Historically, it's quite high. Well, I don't know about quite high, but it can be higher than that. However, we can change things and look back only a few years to COVID. If we look back to COVID times, there was a low rate of 2.65. So if we look at the 2.65 APR for a mortgage loan, let's see how that changes things. It's the same amount. Let's say you're buying the house for the same amount, the same term, you're paying that same term back, but we're going to change the APR, the amount that we're charged on our loan, to 2.65. All of a sudden, our monthly payment just went down by over 500, over $600, $700. How much was it before 2021? I can't even remember. Yeah, it's gone down actually over $700 just by the change of that rate. Again, this is the same amount that we're taking out, but just the interest rate is now 2.65. That's the low that it hit during COVID. $700 a month extra. I don't know about you guys, but that's a good amount of money to have on hand. So you're paying a much lower monthly payment with a low interest rate like that. And moreover, if you look at year four, that's when the switch happens. In other words, after the fourth year, you're starting to pay more towards your principal than to your interest. And so that crossing point is much earlier with a low interest rate. Now, you might say, well, I'm going to go find an interest rate like that. However, that's not how things work. Uh, Interest rates, well, you will see some variance depending on your credit history and all of that, on what kind of rate you can get. And there are some special rates that you can get if you have certain special uh, things on your history. However, um, typically the rates are set by the Federal Reserve, or at least heavily influenced by the Federal Reserve, so the national rate um, that's set for Treasuries. So these rates are sort of an outcome of the times, and we're all victims of the time we live in. So um, but it's something to keep an eye on. And this is also a good cause for, if you look at these rates going very far down, to refinance, to essentially pay off your mortgage with another newer mortgage that has a much lower rate. It will drastically influence um, your monthly payments and your maybe quality of life. All right. Thanks, everybody.